story that came out tonight, as reported, is false.
The White House clashes with media outlets citing anonymous sources that allege Donald Trump shared classified intelligence with a Russian delegation. A British Muslim activist faces charges under terrorism laws after he refuses to hand over the passwords to his laptop and mobile phone at Heathrow Airport. The incident has divided opinion.
This gentleman is someone who appears to attract a lot of attention from our security and intelligence services.
Mr. Rabbani pleading his innocence, it was to do with safeguarding his client, who's a torture victim, and that he didn't want to put him in danger by giving them access.
And Germany is now looking for an alternative military facility to locate its troops after Ankara blocks German officials at a Turkish airbase that is key in the fight against terror. Thanks for joining us here on RT International. We have your latest worldwide headlines. The U.S. media hysteria over Donald Trump's alleged links to Russia showing no sign of dying down, with just the latest claim now coming from the Washington Post. It says the American president gave ISIL-related classified information to the Russian foreign minister and ambassador during last week's meeting in the White House. The Washington Post does not provide a source for the allegation, saying it comes from unnamed, quote, current and former U.S. officials. The information reportedly shared by the president is said to be so sensitive that it's not available to American allies or even parts of the U.S. government. But the U.S. media very quick to run with the story.
Code word means like the vital aspects of the story have to be replaced with other words. You have to say things like, the package has been delivered. The squirrel is in the basket. The idiot is in the oval.
The reports out tonight are that it was Trump himself, not his staff, driving this crisis with the odd disclosure of classified material to Russian adversaries.
But two former officials knowledgeable about the situation tell CNN that the main points of the story, first reported by the Washington Post, are true.
All right, let's discuss this further now. Joining me live in the studio, RT's Murad Gazdiev. Well, it sounds scandalous.
Well, scandalous is the word here. It's a clickbait headline. Trump leaks classified information to Russian ambassador. I mean, that's a very big story. Unfortunately, what it is bare bones on is details. We have neither the name or position of this source other than, an anonymous government official. We don't have the details of what exactly it is that was told to the Russian ambassador during this meeting between Trump and the Russian side. All we know is that it was something about ISIS. This entire meeting was, let's not forget, dedicated to combating terrorism, to combating ISIS. And here we have a story that is basically, the Washington Post's word against Trump's, or against, everyone else's.
So any reaction from the White House at this point?
Well, it's been predictable. The White House has said that, well, take a listen.
Story that came out tonight, as reported, is false. At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed. And the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. And I was in the room. It didn't happen.
We're to take the Washington Post's word on this one, or rather their anonymous official's word.
Well, that's just it, isn't it? I mean, it comes to the issue of proof. Where is the proof, and when will we get it?
Well, we've had very little of that in this story. It is, it's a trust-based thing. In the past, journalists have gotten away with citing anonymous officials, anonymous figures, because people trusted the mainstream media, the big media. If you've got a good name to your publication, people are going to trust you, especially if the story then turns out to be true. And fortunately, that has been changing, especially with the Washington Post. Let's remember the story about Russian hackers hacking the power plant in Vermont in the United States. Washington Post ran with that story. It became huge, millions of clicks. turned out to be completely and utterly false. There's also the story about the entire State Department administration, management resigning under Trump. We then got a chart showing all the officials in the State Department, and you know, only a handful of them had resigned. It's an era of anonymous sources. Since Trump came into power, all these stories, all these publications are running big scandals, big stories based entirely on unverifiable, patently unverifiable information provided by these anonymous officials. And well, here's what Trump has to say about all these allegations made against him.
They shouldn't be allowed to use sources unless they use somebody's name. Let their name be put out there. A source says that Donald Trump is a horrible, horrible human being. Let him say it to my face.
And you know, it's been backfiring. This entire, you know, basing journalists, basing stories on anonymous officials so often, because in the aftermath of the Iraq War and everything that's happened since, the financial crisis, the utterly biased coverage of the United States election, people are losing faith, trust in the media. A new poll has shown that 6 out of 10 Americans have lost their faith in the mainstream media. That, you know, 6 out of 10 Americans believe the mainstream media spreads fake news. So, given, you know, worrying statistics, especially for pundits like this, you've got to ask the question, something's got to change. You know, you can't keep going the way you are.
All right, Artis Murat-Gazdiev, thank you. Well, meanwhile, media and legal analyst Lionel says Western media outlets are desperate for any continued Russian-related scandal.
I'm telling you right now, I promise you, if there is a news director or somebody, they're going to lead with this. And all they're going to do is say Russia. That's it. That's all you need to know, and you will hear a aha. Even though we won't find out what the aha is about, that's all you need to know, because there used to be an expression, if it bleeds, it leads. Now it's, if it's Russia, it doesn't rhyme, but it leads as well. So that's what this is about. Do you know how many times we've heard that Russia hacked the election, the 2016 election? Do you know we still haven't heard how? Still haven't. I'm not even sure how or what they did. It doesn't matter. We're still talking about it.
Let's go live now to political analyst John Bosnitz, now joining us here on the program on RT International. Thanks for joining us here today. The media are really running with this story. Is it possible they are actually onto something big here?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, I've worked in this field for 3 decades. I don't see a scrap of evidence here, but I do see like a shark tank of media feeding, no evidence.
What about Hillary Clinton? Trump attacked Hillary Clinton as being unreliable with so-called state secrets. Can the same now be said of Donald Trump?
Well, you know, Donald Trump is the chief executive officer of the United States of America. And as the chief executive officer of the country, he has full legal and constitutional authority to use state secrets in the conduct of diplomacy. He is also the chief diplomat of the country. So there is a big difference between the chief executive officer deciding what information he can share in the conducting of state policy and Hillary Clinton deciding as a cabinet minister which laws she chooses to obey and which ones she doesn't.
Now, the mainstream media is going on, well, typically a little more than anonymous sources. Is it possible there could be some sort of hidden agenda here?
I don't see any possibility whatsoever. And let's not play the game of dividing the so-called mainstream media from its owners. The mainstream media of the United States is owned, lock, stock, and barrel by the military-industrial complex. So if you want to call it anything, you can call it the military media. The military makes money by making war. They buy the media to promote war. They use the media to promote propaganda in favor of war. And that's where we get in the mess that we're in today, because we have a president who's a businessman and would prefer to make money and would prefer to put people to work in any industry other than war.
But you talk about the military-industrial complex and being effectively in bed with the media, in bed with the governments, because as you were alluding to, war is ultimately a racket. But when it comes to these allegations against the American president here, how much weight should be given to anonymous sources and undisclosed evidence in news reporting?
Well, you know, it depends on who the listener is. I think that the mainstream media in the United States, the military-industrial media in the United States, is depending upon being able to speak to a captive audience of uninformed viewers. Myself, having worked for decades in the media business as a journalist, I know full well that it's not a question of the mainstream media being in bed with the military-industrial complex. It's more of a question of the military-industrial complex paying the media as a prostitute to come to its bed. The military controls the media because they own them. And there's something really important to remember here. The expression military-industrial complex is not some leftist or revolutionary phrase. That phrase was coined by a U.S. president. President Dwight Eisenhower warned the people of America against the military-industrial complex. And now we're seeing a president who was himself a general, a military general. His prediction has come true, and we're seeing exactly what he warned the American people about, and we're seeing the President of the United States today having to fight this creation.
Yeah, that was in the outgoing speech of Eisenhower 70-odd years ago, warning the world about the U.S. military-industrial complex. John Bosnich, a political analyst, joining us live here on RT today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, Trump's decision to sack his FBI chief is still being questioned in the mainstream media, but polls suggest that the American people have a different view. The majority say they approve of the decision or are as of yet undecided. Legal analyst Lionel explains what he thinks the figures really show.
The polls indicate mainstream America, small-town America, the heartland of America, voters, could not care less about James Comey or any of these other names that the mainstream media have propped up. Because there's two different worlds. There is a tremendous disconnect between what the mainstream media think America believes in and what America actually believes in.